Hey everyone, today I want to cover the unique factory features and aspects of a Shelby GT350R. This is specifically for anyone that might be looking to purchase one of these cars and they want to make sure the vehicle that they're looking at has all the correct factory features and parts. So before I dive into what is probably the most well-known aspect, the carbon fiber wheel, real quickly, every GT350R left the factory with Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2s. A lot of people change them out. It's a pretty aggressive street tire, but that's the factory tire. Also, all 350Rs from the factory had red calipers all around. So if you see a 350R that does not have a red caliper, they've been repainted. So the GT350R's carbon fiber wheels. This was the first mass-produced wheel to feature an all-carbon fiber construction from the manufacturer. I did a separate video on this wheel. I'll also link it in the video if you want to see this wheel off the car. There have been 350Rs for sale that do not have, legitimate 350Rs that do not have the factory carbon fiber wheel. There are a couple companies out there that make replicas that look very much like this wheel, but they are not. If you're looking at a car and it does not have the original carbons on it, keep in mind a good set of used carbon fiber wheels is probably going to cost you in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $12,000. And to buy them, all four wheels new, is probably going to cost you the better part of about $20,000. So this is a very, very expensive feature on this car. So how to identify if it is an actual factory carbon fiber wheel. From the outside, there's a few things that are pretty obvious. You can see the weave of the carbon. Now, it's not the traditional checkerboard weave, but it doesn't have the flat smoothness that a metal painted wheel. So you can kind of see in the little bit of the waviness of the carbon there on the outer lip of it. Also, that typically the aftermarket ones won't have this. They're not going to have the reflective ceramic heat coating on the inner barrel. This is only on the front wheels. This was to keep the heat off of the carbon if you were tracking the car. It has a very rough texture to it, so it's pretty obvious if it has that coating on it. Also, the center section on these is recessed. On some of the aftermarket ones, this center section is not as recessed as it is on the original wheels. And another giveaway is the sleeves for the lug nuts. These are actual metal sleeves to keep the lug nuts and the studs from damaging the carbon. So you can kind of see in the light, it's a little bit of a different color black here. This is basically an anodized aluminum. You can see it almost has like a purple hint to it. So those are metal. And on the back side, there's a metal hub that they all made up to that acts basically as a spacer between the front of the rotor and the back side of the carbon wheel. So that makes it pretty obvious to see from the front. If you're able to get the car in the lift or see it from the back side, there are also some pretty good dead giveaways. The carbon on the inner barrel is much more pronounced than its carbon fiber. You can see in the light there, the weave is very pronounced. You can see that common checkerboard look for the carbon. And finally, on every single OE carbon fiber wheel, you will have two stickers. It basically is a sticker from Carbon Revolution that says FOMO code, show it's an original factory part, and it has the part number on there and the sizing as well with the Carbon Revolution logo on it. So on the back wheel, a little bit different. Like I said, you don't have that spray-on ceramic coating, but the carbon is also pretty pronounced on the rear wheel, and just like the front, you have your dual stickers of the FOMOCO and Carbon Revolution stickers with the part number and the sizing on it. And while we're under here, all 350Rs from the factory did not have resonators. And on the front of the car, you obviously have the splitter. Now, the splitter for the 350R was considerably larger than on the base cars, especially here on the corners. It protruded out pretty far, so you had to be pretty mindful of that when you were both walking around the car and also going over any sort of inclined speed bumps, driveways, things like that. So these things, usually you don't find them in too good a shape used. Traditionally, they would get pretty scraped up. So it's going to be about a $1,500 part should you ever need to replace one if a car you're looking at is either damaged or it's missing. That's why I also recommend, I did a video on this, I put a set of slip lows on mine. It's a good DIY universal way to protect it and basically act as a sort of skid plate for it. So one thing that's also worth noting on these is a lot of these cars, the splitters were not properly installed. So you want this to be pretty tight to the bumper itself. There really shouldn't be any gap. I have a couple tiny little waves in the gap right there. That's about as good as I can get mine, but it's pretty much almost perfectly snug all the way across. If there's gaps there, if you can see the actual painted part of the bumper where it has the little clips where it mounts, it's too low. And some of them will be so improperly stalled to the point where the center section will actually start to bow under the stress of high-speed driving. So you also want to check that so that the splitter doesn't potentially become damaged when you're driving it. And all 350Rs had the red logos on them, except for the Heritage cars. All right, and then as far as the wing on the GT350R, it has a lot of waviness in the carbon. Just like the wheels on the outside, it does not have that traditional woven checkerboard look to it, but you can see in the light, there is a lot of waviness to it. So that's kind of the way to tell whether it's like plastic or some other material versus carbon. It is very, very obvious how much waviness there is in the carbon. This apparently was not the lightest carbon fiber wing, but it is extremely expensive. This is like a $10,000 factory part. So you really want to make sure that you're getting the correct one. If you're paying full retail or you're looking to purchase one of these cars have been getting considerably more expensive now that they are out of production. I also have some high-def photos I had when I did a photo shoot for this car. I will also show them in the video, and the waviness on the picture is also very pronounced. And just like on the front, you have your red 350R emblem, except if you had a Heritage car. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the interior, which is very unique to this car. All right, the inside of the GT350R, the same basic layout as the base cars, but some very unique and subtle differences throughout. The only place it actually says GT350R on a 350R is the dash plaque on the passenger side. So if you see it on the fenders or somewhere else, that's not factory. You also have the red Cobra logo on the Heritage cars, that would be blue. Then the chassis number, the second character on a 350R should be the letter R. The first character, L, is the year, for mine, 2020. R for an actual factory 350R, and the last three characters are the chassis number. This is LR108. So like I said, the same basic setup as the base car, but you are going to have red trim throughout. Primarily is going to be the stitching on the door panels, on the seats, on the center section, on the steering wheel, and in also a few other places. One thing worth noting, 19 and 20 350Rs, with the exception of the 2020 Heritage, had the red bolsters on the seats here. So 19 and 20, every other car besides the Heritage cars are going to have that red bolstering. The early cars, 15 to 18, will not. One thing also worth noting for this car, in what is called the 350R base, from 15 to 18, meaning it had no radio air conditioning, and you could pay money if you wanted to have those put back in. I know those have a very much cult-like following. I believe they only made 135 of those throughout that 4-year run for the base cars. It won't have a radio in the center section. It's basically just going to have a piece of plastic with the R logo over it. So the seats did not have, you had no option for seats on the 350Rs. The base cars, you can get the Recaros with standard equipment, and you could opt up for the leather trim sport seats. With the R models, what you see is what you got. It came with these very aggressive seats. The actual structure and physical setup are the same as the Recaro seats in the base car, but the trim is different. You have the red stitching on it. It has the R logo in the center instead of saying GT350. So it is unique. The shape is the same, but the stitching and the way it looks on the outside is unique to the R model. You kind of have this carbon look to it. These things are also a very expensive aspect of this car. Not too many people change them out, but you mainly want to look to make sure that they're not damaged, especially on things like the bolsters. They were very aggressive in this car. You kind of got to be careful when you're getting in and out not to rub up against them too much, potentially damage the bolsters. So this is also a very expensive seat. On the early cars that do not have the red trim on them, the red center sections here, you're probably looking at about $4,000, give or take, for a used set. Obviously, those prices can vary significantly, but typically on these newer seats with the red bolsters, they're considerably more expensive. Typically, you don't find them as individual seats. You find them a lot in pairs used, and I'm usually seeing them $7,000 to $8,000 for a set. So just keep that in mind if you're looking for a 350R and if the seats are either not original or potentially have some damage. And also, all 350Rs, with the exception of one factory car, left the factory with the rear seat delete. So the base cars had rear seats. The Rs did not. Some R owners have gotten the kits to put rear seats in them, but just keep that in mind. That panel, if you ever had to replace it, it's about $750 to $1,000 new. So just keep that in mind. If someone's done a conversion, just make sure that they have the actual rear seat delete on it. Like I said, there was one car from the factory, one 350R, that left with a rear seat, but that car, I'm sure, is extremely expensive, and if it ever comes up for sale, would be very, very pricey. So that's basically the inside of these cars. Really unique, really well set up, very beautiful look too. I like the center section with the red on the center of the steering wheel. For $19 and $20, they made an option for this carbon fiber dash panel piece. So this was a $500 option from the factory. Real nice, helped really spruce up the interior. But just like the base cars, the layout is essentially the same. And finally, one more thing I want to cover that a lot of people overlook with this car. And finally, the adjustable top strut mounts. This is overlooked by a lot of owners. Every GT350R from the factory was spec'd to have a set of the adjustable top strut mounts. The problem was Ford did not start equipping them with this from the factory until mid-2020. So if you have a 15 to early 2020 350R, this non-adjustable one is what came mounted from the factory. Where this became a huge problem was Ford really did not do a good job specifying to dealers how this process worked, and a lot of owners had to educate dealers on this. Rather than Ford putting the adjustable ones in the trunk or in the car itself when it got shipped to the dealer, they would ship these separately in a box with your VIN number on it to the parts department of the dealer you purchased the vehicle from brand new. So the parts departments were notorious for losing these things, and often the dealers would have to buy a new kit. Now, it's not the worst thing in the world. This kit's about $400, give or take. It would have two of these because they're adjustable. They are two-piece design. They are left and right specific, and it would come with all new hardware because Ford specified the hardware was one-time use only. I did a separate video on this covering this in a little bit more detail, but if you have a 2020 and you're not 100% sure if yours came with this, check out my video where I go under the hood and it talks about how to identify. But the easiest way is if you have access to the Windows sticker under Equipment Group 920, which is the 350R Equipment Group. At the very bottom, it will say Adjustable Strut Mount. Next to it, if it has Dealer Installed Accessory abbreviated next to the top strut mount, that means that it was not installed from the factory and it was up to the original purchasing dealer to install them at no cost to the original owner. So, like I said, it's about a $400 kit if they're missing it. Not the worst thing in the world, but unfortunately, a lot of owners had to educate the dealers on how this process worked because Ford really did not do a good job explaining this. So if you're looking for a 350R, at least make sure you get the proper adjustable ones, even if they're not mounted, so at least you have them should you sell the car and the next owner be looking for it, or if you ever want to put a more aggressive track alignment on it, you have them available. So anyone out there looking to purchase a 350R, these are the aspects of the car, and like I said, many of them are very expensive, so do your homework and make sure that they are all on the car that you may potentially be purchasing. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.